On my birthday, my dad said there wasn't enough cake left for me, but he made sure my sister's friend got a slice and even seconds. I didn't say anything. I picked up my jacket and walked out. They called me ungrateful. I didn't fight back, I just. Okay, prepare yourself, because this is a story that still stings, even after all these years. Imagine celebrating your 17th birthday, only to have your own family deny you a slice of your own cake, because a guest needed seconds. That night, I realized I was utterly invisible. But what they didn't know was that the girl they overlooked was about to vanish from their lives completely. To truly grasp why that birthday nightmare hit me so hard, you need a little background on my family. I'm Kelly, the middle child. My older brother, Jake? Total golden boy. Star quarterback, straight A's, could literally do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Then there was Madison, my younger sister. The baby. And at 14, she was utterly spoiled rotten. Dad called her his little princess, and Mom? She catered to Madison's every single whim. And me? I was just, there. The forgettable middle child. The one who kept her head down, got decent grades, never caused a fuss. I learned pretty fast that if I wanted any peace, I needed to stay out of the spotlight. When I made the honor roll, it was expected. When Jake did, it was a national holiday. When Madison barely scraped by. Oh, she's trying her best, and she'd still get rewarded. Yeah, I stopped expecting equal treatment around age 12. But birthdays? Birthdays were supposed to be different. I really thought they were. The incident happened on my 17th birthday, March 15th. 17 felt like such a huge milestone to me. I was almost 18, almost free, almost able to make my own choices. My expectations were modest, truly. Maybe dinner at my favorite local diner, nothing fancy, just a place that made amazing milkshakes. Cake with the family. And hopefully, those art supplies I'd been subtly hinting at for months. The day started off okay. Mom even made my favorite blueberry pancakes. Dad actually remembered to wish me a happy birthday before heading to work. Madison, surprisingly, gave me a handmade card, which was sweet. Jake, who was away at college, had called the night before. I was feeling optimistic. The trouble started around 3 p.m. Madison's friend Chloe was over, which wasn't unusual, those two were practically joined at the hip. What was unusual was how my parents were with Chloe. They were incredibly attentive, asking about her family, her school, making sure she was comfortable. More attentive, honestly, than they'd been with me all day. I found out why when I overheard Mom on the phone with Chloe's mother. Apparently, Chloe's parents were going through a messy divorce, and she'd been staying with us more and more to escape the fighting. Mom was trying to make her feel welcome, loved. I understood, I really did. Chloe was a sweet kid, and if my parents wanted to help her, that was admirable. But it was still my birthday. Around 5, I gently asked Mom about dinner plans. She looked flustered. Oh, honey, we just ordered pizza. It's been such a hectic day. No mention of the diner. When I reminded her, softly, that it was my birthday and maybe we could still go out, she sighed. Kelly, honey, Chloe's here, and she's going through a lot right now. Can't we just have a nice, quiet evening at home? I swallowed the bitter lump of disappointment. Okay, I said, pizza's fine. At least there would be cake, right? Dinner was just awkward. Dad barely glanced up from his phone. Mom kept fussing over Chloe. Madison was her usual dramatic self, telling elaborate stories that somehow always centered on her. I tried to join in a few times, but I was constantly talked over, ignored. Chloe, to her credit, tried to include me, but she was clearly dealing with her own issues. After dinner, Mom brought out the cake. It was a small, store-bought chocolate cake, not even my favorite strawberry. But whatever. It was cake. It was my birthday. I was trying to stay positive. Then, everything went to hell. Mom started cutting. She gave the first piece to Chloe. Because you're our guest, sweetie. Okay, fine. I could live with that. The second piece went to Madison, the third to Dad. I was sitting right there, the birthday girl, waiting for my slice. Instead, Mom looked at the remaining cake, frowned, and said, "Oh, no. I don't think there's enough left for everyone." I stared at her. "What do you mean? There's like half a cake left." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Well, Chloe should have seconds if she wants them, and Madison will want another piece later. And your father always has a sweet tooth after dinner." I felt like I'd been slapped. "But it's my birthday." That's when Dad finally looked up from his phone. "Kelly, don't be selfish. We have a guest, and Chloe needs some sweetness in her life right now. You're old enough to understand that sometimes we have to put others first." I sat there in stunned silence. Mom cut another piece for Chloe, who looked absolutely mortified and tried to refuse it. "Really, Mrs. Johnson?" "I don't need another piece," Chloe said, glancing at me with obvious guilt. "Nonsense," Mom said brightly. "You're skin and bones. You need to eat more." Madison, oblivious as ever, had already finished her slice and was eyeing the cake again. "Can I have another piece, too?" "Of course, Princess," Dad said, without even looking at me. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about there not being enough cake. This was about my family genuinely not caring that it was my birthday. I was so unimportant to them that on my own birthday, I ranked below a guest, below my sister's potential second helping, below my father's hypothetical sweet tooth. I don't know what came over me, but suddenly, I felt completely calm. The hurt was still there, burning in my chest like acid, but it was overlaid with this strange, cold clarity. I stood up quietly, grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Mom asked, sounding annoyed, not concerned. "Out," I said simply. "It's your birthday." Madison piped up, as if she just remembered. "Don't you want cake?" I looked back at the table. At the cake everyone but me had gotten to eat. At my family, who couldn't even bother to make sure the birthday girl got a slice. At poor Chloe, practically shrinking into her chair with embarrassment. "Apparently," I said quietly, "there isn't enough for me." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "Don't be so dramatic, Kelly. You're acting like an ungrateful brat. Do you see what Chloe is going through? Her whole family is falling apart, and you're throwing a tantrum because you have to wait 5 minutes for cake?" "I'm not throwing a tantrum," I said. And I wasn't. My voice was steady. Calm. "I'm leaving. If you walk out that door, don't expect us to save you any cake." Mom called after me. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I wouldn't dream of it. I spent my 17th birthday walking around our neighborhood in the dark, crying angry, frustrated tears. I just kept thinking about how utterly invisible I'd become in my own family. I ended up at the local 24-hour diner, the one I'd wanted to go to for dinner, and used my babysitting money to buy myself a slice of strawberry pie and a milkshake. The waitress, a kind woman named Dolores, who'd seen me there before, noticed how upset I looked. When I told her it was my birthday and I was celebrating alone, she looked so genuinely sad I almost started crying again. She brought me a second slice of pie with a candle in it and sang "Happy Birthday" to me right there. It was the only time anyone sang to me that day. I got home around 11 to a stark, quiet house. Everyone was in bed. The cake was still on the kitchen counter, and sure enough, Madison had gotten her second piece. There was maybe one slice left of my own birthday cake. I didn't take it. I just went to bed. The next morning, Mom was furious. She accused me of ruining my own birthday party, of being selfish and attention-seeking, of making poor Chloe feel unwelcome. Dad barely acknowledged what had happened, just mumbled something about teenagers being dramatic. Madison actually asked me why I'd left without having cake, as if she genuinely couldn't understand why that might have been hurtful. Nobody apologized. Nobody seemed to think they'd done anything wrong. That's when I started planning. And here's where the revenge part comes in, because I didn't just let it go. I couldn't. That birthday showed me exactly where I stood in my family's priorities. And I decided that if they wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, I'd show them what it was like when I actually wasn't there. The first thing I did was start documenting everything. Every time I was overlooked, ignored, or treated as less important than Jake or Madison, I wrote it down. Every family event where my accomplishments were minimized or forgotten. Every dinner where my preferences were dismissed. Every conversation where I was interrupted or talked over. I recorded it all. I also started paying closer attention to the family finances, which might sound weird, but stick with me. See, I did most of the grocery shopping because Mom was always too busy. I balanced the checkbook because Dad was terrible with numbers and Jake was away. I knew exactly how much money came in and went out every month. What I discovered was shocking. My parents were spending a fortune on Madison's activities and social life. Dance classes, cheerleading, expensive clothes, concert tickets, dinners out with friends, hundreds of dollars every month. Jake's college expenses were high, of course, but that was expected. Me? My art supplies came out of my babysitting money. My clothes were mostly hand-me-downs or clearance items. When I'd asked for a car for my 16th birthday, I was told we couldn't afford it. But Madison had gotten a brand new iPhone that same month. I realized I wasn't just emotionally invisible. I was financially invisible. They literally budgeted around me. So, I started planning my exit strategy. Not running away, that would be stupid. But a systematic withdrawal from the family dynamic that would make them realize exactly how much they depended on me. Phase 1 was subtle. I stopped doing the extra things I normally did without being asked. I stopped picking up after Madison, stopped covering for her when she forgot chores, stopped helping her with homework. When Mom asked me to run errands or do extra housework, I started saying I was busy or had plans. Not defiantly, just matter-of-factly, the way Jake did when he didn't want to do something. I also became less available for family activities. When they planned outings or movie nights, I'd often have other plans, which usually meant the library, visiting Dolores at the diner, or just long walks. I was always polite, never rude. I just wasn't there as much. The changes were small at first, but they added up. Madison started getting in trouble at school because I wasn't helping her stay organized. The house was messy because I wasn't automatically cleaning up everyone else's disasters. Mom had to start doing her own grocery shopping, which she hated. But they still didn't really notice. Not consciously. They just knew things were somehow harder, but couldn't put their finger on why. Phase 2 began about 2 months after my birthday. I got a part-time job at a local art supply store. This served multiple purposes. First, it gave me my own spending money, so I wasn't dependent on my parents for anything. Second, it gave me a legitimate reason to be out of the house even more. Third, and most importantly, it connected me with other people who actually appreciated my talents. My boss, Mrs. Chen, was a retired art teacher who immediately recognized my potential. She gave me extra responsibilities, let me help with workshop classes, and even featured some of my artwork in the store's display. For the first time in years, I felt valued. I also started making real friends, not just school acquaintances. Other kids who worked at the store, adult artists who came in for supplies, elderly people who attended classes. Suddenly, I had a whole social circle that had nothing to do with my family. The more connected I became to this new world, the more I realized how truly toxic my home environment had become. It wasn't just the cake incident, that was just the final straw. It was years of being overlooked, minimized, treated as if my feelings and needs didn't matter. But I still wasn't ready to confront them directly. Instead, I moved to Phase 3. Phase 3 was about financial independence and college planning. I researched scholarships, grants, student aid. I met with my school counselor. I took practice SATs and started preparing applications. What I discovered was that I was actually a really strong candidate for several art scholarships, My grades were good, my portfolio was impressive, and I had a compelling personal story about overcoming challenges. Mrs. Chen even offered to write me a recommendation letter. The kicker? I found a full scholarship program at a prestigious art school in California. Full tuition, room and board, plus a stipend for supplies. It was incredibly competitive, but Mrs. Chen thought I had a real shot. I spent months preparing my application in secret. I used the computers at school and the library so my parents wouldn't see what I was working on. I had my portfolio professionally photographed using money from my job. I wrote essay after essay about my artistic journey and my goals. I didn't tell my family any of this. As far as they knew, I was just working at the art store and doing my regular school stuff. They never asked about my college plans, never showed interest in my artwork, never wondered why I was spending so much time at the library. In December, 8 months after my 17th birthday, I got the acceptance letter. Full scholarship to California Institute of the Arts. I literally cried when I opened it. Not just because I got in, but because it meant I was going to be free. I still didn't tell my family. I had one more phase to complete. Phase 4 was the most satisfying part of my plan, and it centered around Madison's 15th birthday in February. Madison had been talking about her birthday for months. She wanted a huge party with all her friends, a professional DJ, catered food, the works. Mom and Dad were totally on board, of course, already planning to spend more on her party than they'd spent on me in the entire previous year. But here's the thing, I had been the one organizing family celebrations for years. I was the one who remembered to order cakes, coordinated schedules, handled all the details. I was the family's unofficial event planner, and I was damn good at it. So, when Madison's birthday planning started ramping up in January, I just didn't help. When Mom asked me to research caterers, I said I was busy with work. When she asked me to help coordinate with Madison's friends, I said Madison was old enough to handle her own invitations. When she asked me to pick up party supplies, I reminded her that I didn't have a car and my work schedule was really packed. I wasn't rude. I wasn't defiant. I was just unavailable. The result was predictable chaos. Mom had never organized a party by herself and had no idea how much work was involved. Dad kept forgetting to follow up on things he'd promised to handle. Madison assumed everything was being taken care of and didn't lift a finger. 2 weeks before the party, they realized they were in serious trouble. The venue they wanted was booked. The caterer they'd talked to had never received a deposit and had given their date to someone else. Half of Madison's friends hadn't received invitations because nobody had actually sent them out. That's when Mom came to me in a panic. "Kelly, honey, I need your help with Madison's party. Everything is falling apart, and you're so good at organizing these things." I looked up from my homework, college application essays, actually, but she didn't know that, and said calmly, "I'm sorry, Mom, but I'm really swamped with work and school right now. I'm sure you'll figure it out. But Kelly, you know how important this is to your sister. She's been looking forward to this party for months." "I know," I said. Just like I was looking forward to my birthday dinner at the diner. "But sometimes things don't work out the way we plan, right?" Mom stared at me for a moment, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was starting to realize that my helpfulness wasn't automatic, wasn't guaranteed. But she still didn't connect it to how they treated me. "Kelly, please. I know you're upset about your birthday." "I'm not upset," I interrupted. And I meant it. "I'm just busy. You managed to plan Jake's graduation party without me, and all those events for Madison's dance team. I'm sure Madison's birthday will be fine." It wasn't fine, of course. They ended up having to throw together a last-minute party at our house with store-bought decorations and pizza. Madison cried when her dream party didn't happen. Dad blamed Mom for poor planning. Mom blamed everyone for not helping enough. And through it all, I remained perfectly calm and polite. I even helped clean up afterward, because I'm not a monster. But I didn't save the day. I didn't swoop in with a magical solution. I didn't sacrifice my own plans to make everything perfect. The birthday cake situation was particularly poetic. Mom had ordered a custom cake from an expensive bakery, but because of all the chaos, she forgot to pick it up. The bakery ended up selling it to another customer. So, Madison's 15th birthday cake was a grocery store sheet cake, hastily decorated with mismatched candles. When Madison complained about the cake, Dad actually said, "At least you got cake." Some people would be grateful just to have family celebrating with them. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But the real climax came 2 weeks later when I got an unexpected piece of news that would change everything. I was at work when Mrs. Chen called me to her office, a huge smile on her face. She'd just gotten off the phone with someone from Cal Arts. Not only had I been accepted with a full scholarship, but they were also offering me a spot in their prestigious summer pre-college program. I'd be able to start taking classes immediately after high school graduation, giving me a head start on my degree. There was just one catch: I needed to accept the offer within a week, and I needed a parent's signature on some of the paperwork since I was still 17. This was it. The moment I'd been building toward for almost a year. Time to reveal my master plan. I went home that evening and found my family in their usual positions. Dad watching TV. Mom scrolling through Facebook. Madison on her phone. Just a normal Tuesday evening in the Johnson household. "I have some news to share," I announced. Barely anyone looked up. Dad grunted an acknowledgement. Mom said, "That's nice, dear," without taking her eyes off her screen. Madison ignored me completely. I took a deep breath and pulled out the acceptance letter. I've been accepted to California Institute of the Arts with a full scholarship. I'll be leaving for California right after graduation. That got their attention. Dad's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" Mom's phone clattered to the floor. "California? Kelly? What do you mean, California?" Madison finally looked at me, confused. "Wait, you're leaving?" I handed Dad the acceptance letter. His face went through a series of expressions as he read: confusion, surprise, and then something that might have been pride if I was being generous. This is a really good school, Kelly. And a full scholarship." He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "When did you apply to college? Why didn't you tell us you were applying to college?" "I've been working on applications since last summer," I said calmly. "I didn't think you'd be interested. You never asked about my college plans." Mom was frantically reading over Dad's shoulder. "But Kelly, California is so far away. What about community college?" "What? About staying close to family? What about it?" I asked. The question hung in the air for a moment. What about family? What about the family that forgot my birthday dinner? That couldn't spare me a slice of my own birthday cake? That never asked about my dreams or goals or plans for the future? Madison was starting to look panicked. But who's going to help me with my homework? Who's going to drive me places when Mom's busy? "You will," I said, echoing the words I'd heard so often when I needed help. "You'll figure it out." Dad was still staring at the letter. "Kelly, this is incredible. I had no idea you were this talented. Look at this scholarship amount. This is more money than we make in 6 months." Now he was impressed. Now that there was a dollar figure attached to my abilities, suddenly I mattered. "There are some papers you need to sign," I said, pulling out the enrollment packet. "I need them back by Friday." Of course," Dad said, still in shock. "We should celebrate. This is amazing news. Kelly, why didn't you tell us you were this serious about art?" I looked at him for a long moment. "When have you ever asked about my art?" Silence. Because he couldn't remember asking. Because he never had. Mom jumped in, trying to smooth over the awkward moment. "We should go out to dinner to celebrate." "Where would you like to go?" "The diner on 5th Street, I said immediately. "Oh, but they don't take reservations," and the wait is always so long. Then I guess we're not celebrating, I said with a shrug. The look on her face was priceless. She was finally starting to understand that her preferences and convenience weren't automatically more important than mine. We did end up going to the diner that night. We waited 45 minutes for a table, just like Mom predicted. But for the first time in years, my family actually listened when I talked. They asked about my plans, about the school, about my artwork. Dad even asked to see my portfolio, which he'd never shown interest in before. It felt good, but it also felt hollow. Like too little, too late. Over the next few days, as word spread about my scholarship, I watched my family's behavior toward me shift dramatically. Suddenly, I was the talented one, the artistic one, the daughter they were so proud of. Friends of my parents, who had barely acknowledged my existence before, were suddenly asking about my artwork and my college plans. Jake called from college to congratulate me, and even he admitted he hadn't realized how serious I was about art. I just thought it was a hobby, he said. I had no idea you were actually good enough for a scholarship like this. And even Madison started treating me differently. She began asking for my opinion on things, wanting to spend time with me, suddenly interested in learning about art. It was like she'd realized I was a person with value, not just a built-in homework helper and problem solver. But here's the thing about revenge. Even when it works perfectly, even when you get everything you wanted, it doesn't actually heal the hurt that caused it. Don't get me wrong, I was thrilled about college. I was excited about my future, proud of what I'd accomplished, relieved to know I'd be free soon. But I also felt this deep sadness about my family, because now that they were finally paying attention to me, I could see glimpses of what our relationships could have been like all along. The night before I left for California, Mom came into my room while I was packing. She sat on my bed and watched me fold clothes for a few minutes before speaking. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I stopped packing and looked at her. Your birthday last year. I was so focused on helping Chloe through her parents' divorce that I completely forgot it was supposed to be your special day. That wasn't fair to you. It wasn't just the birthday, Mom, I said. It was everything. 4 years. Everything. She nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. I know. I know. And I'm so sorry, Kelly. I don't know how we got so off track with you. You were always so independent, so capable, so easy. Jake needed so much attention with his sports and his college prep. And Madison was always so dramatic and demanding. You just seemed to have everything figured out on your own. I didn't have everything figured out, I said. I was just scared to ask for help because I didn't think you cared. Mom started crying then. Really crying. Of course we cared. We care so much. You're our daughter, Kelly. We love you. I know you love me, I said, and I meant it. But love isn't the same as attention. Love isn't the same as making someone feel valued. We talked for over an hour that night. Really talked, maybe for the first time in years. She told me about how overwhelmed she'd been trying to manage everyone's needs. How she'd taken my self-sufficiency for granted, how she'd assumed I knew how proud she was of me, even though she never said it. I told her about feeling invisible, about the years of small slights and overlooked moments. About how the birthday cake incident had been the final straw that made me realize I needed to create my own path. I wish you had told us how you were feeling, she said. I wish you had asked, I replied. Dad and I had a similar conversation the next morning. He admitted that he'd been so focused on Jake's achievements and Madison's needs that he'd somehow convinced himself I didn't need the same level of attention. He was proud of my independence, but realized he'd used it as an excuse not to engage with me as much. I see now that we failed you, he said. Not intentionally, but we failed you anyway. And look what you accomplished in spite of us. Maybe because of us, but I wish it had been different. Madison's goodbye was the hardest. She was only 15, and I could see that she genuinely didn't understand how her behavior had contributed to the family dynamic. In her mind, she'd just been being herself, and everyone else had been responsible for managing around her needs. "I'm going to miss you so much," she cried as she hugged me. "Who's going to help me figure things out?" "You are," I said. "You're smart, Madison. You don't need me to solve your problems." "But what if I mess up?" "Then you'll learn from it. That's how growing up works." Jake drove down from college to say goodbye, which meant a lot to me. He apologized too, for being so wrapped up in his own life that he'd never noticed how I was being treated. "I always thought you were fine," he said. "You seemed so together, so sure of yourself. I never realized you were struggling." "I wasn't struggling," I said. "I was adapting. There's a difference." As I loaded my bags into Dad's car for the drive to the airport, I felt a weird mix of emotions. Sadness about leaving, excitement about my future, satisfaction that my plan had worked, and a strange kind of forgiveness for my family. Because here's what I learned through this whole experience: my parents weren't evil people. They weren't deliberately trying to hurt me. They were just flawed humans who made mistakes, who got caught up in their own lives and needs, who took the easy child for granted while focusing on the squeaky wheels. That doesn't excuse what they did. It doesn't erase the years of feeling unimportant. But it does mean that my revenge, while satisfying, was ultimately about more than just getting back at them. It was about proving to myself that I mattered, that I had value, that I could create my own opportunities, even when the people who were supposed to support me didn't. The flight to California was the first time I'd ever flown alone. The first time I'd been more than 100 miles from home. As we took off and I watched my hometown get smaller and smaller below me, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete freedom to be whoever I wanted to be. College was everything I dreamed it would be, and more. I threw myself into my art, made incredible friends, worked with professors who saw my potential and pushed me to grow. For the first time in my life, I was in an environment where my talents were recognized and valued, where I wasn't competing with siblings for attention, where I could just be Kelly. I called home regularly, and slowly, my relationships with my family started to improve. It was easier to appreciate them when I wasn't living under their roof, when their attention, or lack thereof, wasn't my primary source of validation. Madison started doing better in school once she had to rely on herself instead of me. She's actually pretty capable when she has to be, and she's developed more empathy as she's gotten older. She still texts me regularly asking for advice, but now it feels like a choice rather than an obligation. Jake and I have become much closer. He visits me in California sometimes, and we've had lots of honest conversations about our childhood and family dynamics. He's admitted that he was pretty self-absorbed in high school and college, and he's made a real effort to be a better brother. Mom and Dad have both changed, too. They're more attentive when I'm home, more interested in my life and achievements. Dad actually has some of my artwork hanging in his office now, and he loves telling people about his daughter, the artist. Mom makes a point of planning activities around my preferences when I visit. It's not perfect. We still have our issues, and I don't think I'll ever fully get over feeling like an afterthought for so many years, but we're in a much better place than we were when I left. The best part? Last year, on my 20th birthday, they flew out to California to visit me. We went to this amazing little restaurant I'd been wanting to try. And afterward, Mom presented me with a homemade strawberry cake, my actual favorite flavor, with 20 candles. "I know I can't make up for that birthday 3 years ago," she said. "But I wanted you to know that I remember now. I remember what you like, what matters to you, how important you are to our family." I cried a little when she said that. Happy tears, for once. But here's the real kicker. The part that makes this whole story feel like perfect poetic justice. Remember Chloe, Madison's friend who was at my 17th birthday dinner? The girl who got cake when I didn't? I ran into her mom at the grocery store last Christmas when I was home for the holidays. We got to talking, and she mentioned how grateful she's always been to our family for being so kind to Chloe during her parents' divorce. "You know," she said, "Chloe still talks about that night at your birthday dinner. She felt so bad that she got cake and you didn't. She said it bothered her for months afterward that your parents were trying so hard to make her feel welcome that they forgot to take care of their own daughter. Even Chloe, at 14 years old, had understood that what happened that night was wrong. She'd never forgotten that lesson about not letting kindness to strangers come at the expense of the people we love most. But you know what? I'm actually grateful it happened. Because that birthday, awful as it was in the moment, was the catalyst I needed to take control of my own life. It taught me that I couldn't wait for other people to value me. I had to value myself enough to demand better. My revenge wasn't just about getting back at my family for years of neglect. It was about proving that I was worth more than they realized, worth more than even I had realized. It was about creating my own opportunities, building my own support system, and refusing to accept being treated as less important than I actually am. These days, I'm a successful freelance artist living in Los Angeles. I have work featured in galleries, a thriving online business selling my artwork, and amazing friends who feel like the family I always wanted. I'm happy, fulfilled, and confident in ways I never was when I was desperately seeking my parents' approval. My family and I have good relationships now, but they're based on mutual respect rather than obligation. They know that I have options, that I don't need them in the way I used to, and that knowledge has made them more appreciative of the relationship we do have. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how I handled things, if I wish I had just talked to my parents directly instead of planning such an elaborate exit strategy. And honestly? No regrets at all. Because talking to them wouldn't have worked when I was 17. They weren't ready to hear what I had to say, and I wasn't strong enough yet to say it effectively. I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of more than they thought, and more than I thought, before I could have those honest conversations with them. My revenge gave me the confidence and independence I needed to build a life I actually wanted, instead of just accepting whatever scraps of attention and affection my family was willing to give me. And the best part? Every time I accomplish something new, every time I get a gallery showing or land a big client or reach another milestone in my career, I think about that night when my dad said I was being ungrateful for wanting a slice of my own birthday cake. I wasn't ungrateful then, and I'm not ungrateful now. I'm just someone who knows her worth and refuses to settle for less than she deserves. That's not revenge. That's just good life strategy.